welcome to Question Period on this Sunday, June 15th. I'm Vashi Capellos. Today, deal or no deal?
It's very complimentary to the process of developing that new economic and security partnership with the Americans.
Prime Minister Mark Carney hikes Canadian defense spending, promising to hit NATO's 2% of GDP target this year. The sudden accelerated timeline comes as Canada and the U.S. make headway in bilateral talks and ahead of U.S. President Donald Trump's arrival in Canada for the G7 summit. Could a deal be close? Will Carney and Trump iron one out in Kananaskis? We're going to get perspective on the prospect from former Prime Minister Joe Clark, and the Sunday strategy session will also be here, to weigh in. Then tensions escalate again in the Middle East. Israel strikes Iran's military and nuclear infrastructure. The latest reaction to Israel's move and retaliation to it is just ahead. Plus, a supreme warning.
There is no doubt that the rule of law and the judicial independence is under attack in many countries in the world.
Canada's top justice warns of democratic backsliding around the world. The caution comes as Trump deploys soldiers to quell domestic protests. Was the timing of the justice's warning a coincidence? Supreme Court Chief Justice Richard Wagner is here, and I'll ask him. We'll start today with the conflict raging on in the Middle East. Israel and Iran are trading tit-for-tat aerial strikes. It all began Friday when Israel launched a sudden and blistering round of strikes on Iran's military and nuclear infrastructure. Israel called the military operation preemptive, aimed at stopping the Iranian regime from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Iran called Israel's actions a declaration of war. What's behind the escalation and what are the chances of it widening? Arif Lalani is a former Canadian diplomat who served as ambassador to Jordan, Iraq, and the United Arab Emirates. He's now a senior advisor at Strategy Corp. Juneau is a former Middle East analyst at the Department of National Defense. He's now a professor at the University of Ottawa. Hello to both of you. Thank you very much for making the time for the conversation today. Professor Juneau, I'll start with you. It's no secret that Israel and other countries don't want Iran to be able to launch a nuclear weapon, but that has been the case for a long time. Why Friday? Why now for the strikes that Israel launched?
That's a good question. And based on the information that's come out in the past 48 or so hours, it's not entirely clear exactly why now. We do know that the United States had been negotiating, the Trump administration had been negotiating a nuclear deal with Iran to try to contain its nuclear program. About 2 months ago, there was some hope coming from Washington that might work out. In more recent weeks, the signals from Washington were a bit more hesitant, but there was a bit of an assumption that at least for this week, Trump still wanted Israel to refrain from attacking. Israel chose to attack. Was it to sabotage the nuclear talks that it always opposed, or was it because Trump himself had more or less given a green light to Israel because he had realized that the talks would not work out and that it was time to move from a diplomatic to a military track? At this point, that's not entirely clear based on the information we have.
Mr. Lalani, among the people who have been killed in Iran are people who were involved at a very high level with those negotiations, really high up people when it comes to the military, as well as scientists involved in the nuclear program. How consequential is that, do you think?
I think it's consequential in the short term, but you know, Iran is a large state with a large bureaucracy. These people will be replaced, particularly in the military command. I think the scientists are much harder to replace. So there will be a short-term impact, but long-term, right now, it's not clear how much long-term damage has been done to the nuclear capability. Much of these stockpiles are deep underground and requires weapons that the Israelis don't have, but that the Americans do.
We've talked many times, Professor Juneau, about a conflict, and there have been quite a few in the past few years in the Middle East, and the degree to which one party responds and what it says about the chances of it escalating. In this instance, yes, Iran said it was a declaration of war, the initial launch of strikes on them, and they have retaliated. How contained or not do you assess their response to be?
Iran's response is very contained, and right now Iran faces a really difficult dilemma because what we're seeing in the past 48 hours and is a continuation of a trend that we've seen in the past year and a half, which is the reality that Israel is militarily much more powerful than Iran. Israel knows this and wants to exploit its advantage. Iran knows this, and this ties its hands. Just look at the damage that's been done on both sides since Friday. Israel has caused significant damage to Iran's military capabilities, its air defenses, its missile production facilities, some of its nuclear sites. It's assassinated several military and nuclear leaders, as you said. Iran, in terms of its retaliation, has barely been able to hit a few civilian buildings and maybe a bit of other infrastructure. And that illustrates the reality that Israel's offensive power is much more significant, and its defensive capabilities also. It is able to intercept a lot of the missiles and drones that Iran is launching. So the more this escalates, the more Israel will be able to hurt Iran, and Iran's ability to hurt Israel will remain limited. And that fundamental disequilibrium really disadvantages Iran and constrains its options.
What's your assessment, Mr. Lalani, also of Iranian proxies who we would normally anticipate would respond in a certain way and in the aggregate don't seem to be in this instance?
Yeah, I think Iran's ability to respond is very limited. It has been proven to be very limited in the last round. So I think while Prime Minister Netanyahu talks about a rising lion in terms of Israel, I think you're seeing a paper tiger in terms of Iran. But if I could step back just for a moment, Vashi, I think it's really important that the Prime Minister of Israel has claimed that this attack, on the one hand, was months and months in the planning, and yet he is claiming that it was because there was an imminent existential threat and therefore was a preemptive attack. And you know, the bar in international relations for preemptive attack is you must show evidence of actual mobilization for an attack. And the other context here is you had the United States in a 6th round of negotiations with Iran, and its closest ally in the region attacked its negotiating partner in the middle of those negotiations. So there is clearly dysfunction here on how to manage this, and clearly it's very hard to see what the legitimacy of this is without the evidence.
Yeah, and I imagine there will be a lot of pressure on Professor Juneau, Israel, to produce that evidence, which they insist, and the Prime Minister of that country insists, does exist. I wanted to jump off Mr. Lalani's point around the U.S., though, in particular, because it is sort of this strange set of circumstances that you alluded to as well, where we've got these negotiations that are happening, and even President Trump's response has been, you know, to deny any involvement in this, but to beef up security for American troops in the region. What do you make of where the U.S. fits into this, and what will you be watching for in that respect?
It's not obvious where the U.S. exactly fits, and to me, there's still a bit of mystery on what back-channel conversations there were in the last days and weeks between the U.S. and Israel. Look at the first official reaction from the U.S. on what was for us late Thursday night, just a few days ago. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio issued the first official response, which was very cold, which was not warm in its support for Israel and sought to distance itself from Israel's action, while obviously threatening Iran not to retaliate against American interests. So that first response suggests to me that the U.S. was maybe not ready for this attack, was hoping that it would not happen right away, as President Trump had been signaling for a number of weeks or months, for that matter, even before he was elected, that he favored a diplomatic solution. He favored disengaging the U.S. from the Middle East's forever wars and so on. That is not what happened. Whatever the state of those debates before the attack were, in any case, for 20 years that I've been looking at scenarios of Israel and or the U.S. attacking Iran, it was always clear that once Israel did make the move to attack Iran, whether the U.S. agreed or not, the U.S. would be on side. The U.S. would not let Israel alone to hang dry. The U.S. would support Israel, which is what it's doing now in any case.
So, Mr. Lalani, when we think about the possibility of this widening beyond where it stands at the moment, what factors are you going to be keeping the closest eye on?
I'd be looking very closely at the Straits of Hormuz, which is the seaway through which I think about a third of the world's oil travels through. I think it's about 23 million barrels a day. It's controlled on one side by Oman and on the other side by Iran. And given Iran's very limited ability to respond to this attack, if it tries to disrupt those sea lanes, I think that's the only thing that could bring external countries into this conflict, because no one can afford to have those sea lanes disrupted for a sustained period of time. So I think that's the key issue that I'd be looking at from an economic security perspective.
Got just a few seconds left. Last word to you, Professor Juneau. Same question. Where are your eyes focused this week against the backdrop of the possibility of this escalating beyond where it is at the moment?
I'm looking for signals from either side for an off-ramp. I do not see these signals right now. I do not expect to see them for a few more days. But at some point, Israel, which is leading the momentum on this, will start signaling that it is ready to look for a de-escalation. I don't expect that for a while, but at some point, I'll be looking for those signals.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Thank you very much to both of you for the conversation this morning. I appreciate you making the time for it.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank you, Juneau and Arif Lalani. When we come back today, setting expectations, Prime Minister Mark Carney is preparing to welcome leaders from around the world to Kananaskis in Alberta for the G7. Among the attendees, U.S. President Donald Trump. We'll talk about that and the expectation around the meeting with the former Prime Minister of this country, Joe Clark, the Right Honorable Joe Clark. He will be my guest after a short break here on Question Period. We're back in just a moment.